Welcome to Tentpole Trauma, the podcast where we look at movies that came with hype and high hopes, but left with crushing disappointment, either critically, at the box office, or both. Freed from the weight of expectations, we seek to examine these underperformers under a new light, parsing through the good, the bad, and everything in between with the hopes of gaining a better understanding as to why they failed to find their audience. Warning, there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie that we're discussing today, I suggest you stop the podcast and go watch it. Then when you come back and listen, you'll get more out of the discussion. This episode, we examine the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. When Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street was released in 1984, I was a teenager, and though I did not see it in the theater, some of my horror-obsessed friends did, and their reaction to it was nothing short of ecstatic. I caught up on video and saw the next two sequels in the theater, and though Michael Myers was more my slasher, soon I was a Freddy Krueger convert. I lost track of the Dream Demon over my 20s, but enjoyed the monster mashup between him and Jason Voorhees in 2003's Freddy vs. Jason. By the time a remake was announced in the late aughts, I was back into horror in a big way and was ready for more Freddy. And when Jackie Earle Haley, an actor I loved, was revealed to be taking over for the iconic Robert Englund, and that the film was getting a decent budget to realize its fantastical dream sequences, I was hyped. Some months before the release, a friend of mine scored tickets to a preview screening of the movie, which I was only too happy to accept. There had been rumors of a troubled production as video director Samuel Bayer had never done a feature, but I was still hopeful it would be good. But the film we saw that night was a mess. It's hard for me to remember now, 10 years later, what was different in the preview as compared to the official release, but I do remember the original opening scene took place at a high school party, and that the climax featured out-of-place religious imagery, and that at one point Freddy showed up in monk's robes. It was weird to say the least. When the film was released to the public, I saw it again out of curiosity and thought that improvements had been made, and that the movie had some redeeming qualities overall, but that ultimately it felt inconsequential, and that Jackie Earle Haley fell far short of the great Robert Englund. Critics and fans were far less kind to it than I was, and though the film made a profit, it pretty much shut down the Platinum Dunes remake machine for good. No sequel was ever announced, and Freddy's been absent from our dreams and from movie screens ever since. So what went wrong? That's what we're here to discuss on this episode of Tentpole Trauma, the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street. All right, I'm Sebastian, and I'm here with Jennifer.
Hello.
And Rodney from the Pod Forsaken podcast.
Hey, everyone. Hello.
Rodney, why haven't you have you ever thought of rebranding the podcast to Rod Forsaken?
You know, I bring that up to my co-hosts every episode before we record, and because there's two of them, they always outvote me. But I'm with you. Maybe you want to have a word with them.
This is why you kill your other hosts.
Oh, is that why there were 7 hosts here at Tentpole?
There used to be more hosts for Tentpole Trauma, but they are gone now. They died in their dreams. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Pod Forsaken Horror Podcast is a horror podcast where we kind of do the opposite, I think, of what you guys do. We specifically pick horror movies that most people have never seen or maybe never even heard of. And then we watch them and we tell you about them. We usually do a format where first, at the beginning of the episode, we watch the trailer for the movie we're going to do next week so that you can, you can watch the trailer and decide if this movie is for you. And then, we talk about the movie with no spoilers, give you kind of a review, and then we dive in and just spoil the shit out of it. But the whole point is that, like, we're all horror fans, obviously. And after a certain point, you have to start digging deep to find good stuff, right? Like, theatrical Hollywood movies kind of start leaving a bad taste in your mouth. And so we started the podcast to help horror fans find the really good shit that's either foreign or like independently made that you might not know about. And it's just a passion project that I do with some friends. And we've had a very good response so far. Although no one's probably going to look me in the eyes and say, I hate your fucking podcast, but you're welcome to.
Well, I've been meaning to tell you.
Now's your moment.
No. I love your podcast. Awesome. Well, that's great. We're talking about the 2010 Nightmare on Elm Street remake directed by Samuel Behr. And the reason why I chose it is not because it was a huge financial disaster, because it actually wasn't. It actually cost about $46 million or something and made 3 times that worldwide. So it's not a financial disaster, but I do believe that it effectively, the fan and critical response for it was pretty much toxic, and it pretty much stopped the whole Platinum Dunes remake trend dead in its tracks. And there hasn't been any more. They didn't do any more Friday the 13th. They didn't do another Texas Chainsaw. They shut down Platinum Dunes, Michael Bay's production horror remake company. So I consider it a tentpole trauma because it wrecked the party, so to speak. Let's talk a little bit about your own personal history with the franchise. Jennifer, what is your history with the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise?
Well, saw the first Nightmare on Elm Street pretty young. I saw a lot of horror, probably way younger than I should have. It's a pattern, but I was just really into it. And I most likely saw it on, I know there's no way I didn't have cool enough parents to take me to the theater to see it. But I did probably catch it either on VHS or on, HBO or something like that. Not, whenever it became available. But I had first, heard about it through friends who had seen it, older friends, so I already had an idea of who Freddy was and, like how kids do, you're talking it up and then this happens and he's got knives for fingers and then he says this. And so, that was all amped up and then I saw it and I liked it and I thought it was scary. And
Did you see the first film first?
Yes.
The original Nightmare on Elm Street? You saw that first?
Yes.
Okay.
I have the films of the franchise that I've seen the most are the first and the third. I've seen the Dream Warriors. That was on TV a lot. And I appreciate the first one. I love the first one, but I probably, like, especially when I was younger, was more into 3.
Right.
But yeah, that was my, an initial history with the franchise. It's not my favorite of the horror franchise. I mean, I do like Freddy, but it's not my go-to. For me, it's not as consistent as some other franchises are as far as like having a number of films that I like to go back to and enjoy. There's some that are kind of tough to get through in this one, in my opinion.
Rodney, how about you? What's your history with the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise?
Never seen any of them. Was I supposed to watch that? Actually, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you guys for having me on. I didn't say that. And I think your show is really great. And it's like, I'm really pumped to be here and jazzed to talk about this.
We're pumped to have you, Rodney.
Yes,
I don't know if
are.
you can tell from my voice. This is my pumped voice.
I can tell that you are really jazzed. I'm sort of like where Jen is. I don't remember what my first one was. I feel like at a sleepover, someone showed me part 3. I had parents who were very lenient. I remember seeing part 4 by myself in a theater. I think my dad would like take me to the theater. He'd buy me the ticket. And then like once I went in, he'd like go to a bar and have a drink and be like, I'll see you when it's over. Right. I've never I like them, but Jen's right. These movies are so all over the map. There are really great ones and there are ones that are so low that they're barely movies to me. But in general, they have really creative kills, and Freddy Krueger is like one of the most iconic villains of all time. It's just that there's no consistency between the movies. That's my biggest problem, right? Like, I was
Hmm.
showing my wife them, and we just skipped over part 2. I was like, "You don't need part 2. It's not canon. Let's just
What?
do."
Part
Oh,
2 is amazing.
No, part 2 is
You can't
you're one of
skip
those
over
people.
it.
no, part two.
I did.
Part two is amazing, Rodney. I'm sorry. I've got to. I can't let you think that I don't enjoy part two.
Okay, well, let's not go down the rabbit hole here.
Fair
but-
enough. Fair enough. But look, I enjoy all of the Friday the 13th movies. I've seen them all now multiple times. So, I've always been a Jason guy. I hope that's not a problem. But
No.
Nope.
Freddy's probably my number 2. No, that's not true. He's my number 3. Chucky would be number 2.
I'm a Michael Myers guy myself, and he has some of the worst movies. So it's not really about who's got the best movie. It's just who's your guy. I will say about the Nightmare series, what I do appreciate about it is, generally speaking, even the terrible ones have a certain amount of imagination. Just the premise in itself is inherently imaginative, and I kind of have to give it to Freddy for that. There's always something, even in the most terrible of them, there's always some crazy, interesting nightmare scenario that either makes me laugh or I really enjoy. But let's move on to the subject of remakes in general, because this movie was sort of the final nail in the coffin in some ways of the whole remake trend of the 20-aughts, the early aughts. So, Jen, what is your feeling on remakes in general? Like, I know you're a big Texas Chainsaw fan, and you're not a fan of the Platinum Dunes Texas Chainsaw remake, which sort of kicked off this trend. What is your general feeling on remakes?
Well, with remakes, I kind of feel like, I love horror, so I'm always going to give it a shot. And my expectations are pretty low when I'm watching these. Like I have nowhere to go but up. Texas Chainsaw, I'm just so protective of, because it's just there's nothing like the first Texas Chainsaw.
Where you don't really like the franchise, you just like the first movie and the second one too.
I mean, I pretty much do. Yeah, that's a fact. I mean, I appreciate. I mean, 3 is okay, and I appreciate 4 for being, the weird version that it is. But yeah, that's not one of my favorite remakes. I did like the Friday the 13th remake. I saw that in the theater, and I've seen that several times since. I don't know. I mean, there's none that are really standing out that I'm like, oh, this is, I've never once been like, this was better than the first one.
Look, there are remakes that I think are really good. I'll point to The Ring. I think The Ring is an excellent remake.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think it comes down to how much do you care about the original film and if you saw it. For example, and I know this might get me kicked off, but I've never been a big Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan. Like, I just never, like, I saw it growing up, and it never impacted me the way that it impacts a lot of people. So when I saw the Platinum Dunes remake, I was like, hey, this is pretty good, right? Because I have no emotional attachment to it. But
Yeah.
when I saw the Friday the 13th one, or like the recent Child's Play remake, the Friday the 13th one is okay. It's got some cool shit. But like, in general, remakes just anger me because they're so clearly a cash grab, right? It's just like, yo, let's just capitalize on this thing for money's sake, when the original thing was actually a thing of passion. And every once in a while, the remake is done by someone who is passionate, and you end up with something good, but it's rare. I can point to like Ocean's 11 as another great example. Like, that movie is fucking awesome,
Mhm.
and that's a remake. But in general, if I see it's a remake, it's probably bad, and I don't care.
I am sort of weirdly optimistic about these things. I feel I'm in a sort of strange position there as a horror fan, because I feel most horror fans are not like that. But I get kind of excited with Texas Chainsaw. I was very skeptical about that one, because I feel that the original is such a specific thing that you can't recapture that. You can't recapture that in the 2000s. You can't recreate the 70s and the grime and just the atmosphere of the time that is so inherent in that film. Whereas something like Freddy Krueger or Nightmare on Elm Street, as much as I love the Wes Craven original, and I love the Wes Craven original, I like part 2 for its craziness. Of course, I love Dream Warriors. I generally think that's probably the most fun of all of them. when they announced that they were doing the Nightmare on Elm Street remake or reboot or whatever they were pitching it as, I was actually kind of excited at the idea of it, because I thought, well, there's an idea that you could do now. It would still be just as relevant now. And with modern special effects, you might be able to really take it somewhere really crazy. So I was game for it. And, I felt that most horror fans were definitely not.
Yeah, I was up for it. I saw it in the theater. It was, again, though, the way that like I said, I approach remakes in general, where I didn't have the optimism that you did. I was just kind of like, well, let's see what they're gonna do with it, because I'm just, like I said, happy to get another horror movie. And I do like Freddy a lot, and I do like Jackie Earle Haley, and let's see what's gonna happen.
So Jackie Earle Haley as Freddy was sort of a draw for you.
Sort of, because I'm definitely a fan. Like, I like him a lot. I mean, there's several of his films, and this is when he was, starting to make a comeback and do more stuff. And yeah, I was game.
It's funny. I'm with you, Sebastian, on this one. I was excited. I remember thinking, hey, Platinum Dunes has pretty much delivered above average content to me so far. And it was rated R. And hey, they got Jackie Earle Haley, and he's done some great shit. I was jazzed. I thought this was going to be a pretty good time, So yeah, I saw that, I think, opening weekend.
Jackie Earle Haley was sort of coming off of Watchmen at the time, playing Rorschach, which, has some similarities to Freddy Krueger. So I think people were excited to see him take on the role, if they were excited about it. They were excited to see him take it on because of Rorschach and because of the other stuff he had done. He had done Little Children or
Yes.
something like that
Yes.
before, which had a sort of similar type of icky character in it. So it seemed pretty promising. Now, the film is directed by Samuel Bayer. Do you guys know what his claim to fame is?
Yes.
I do now, but only because I looked it up.
He directed the Smells Like Teen Spirit video from Nirvana, and he also directed the B-Girl video for Blind Melon. So,
No Rain.
he's a guy who clearly has some visual talent. The weird thing, and I remember thinking this at the time, is why hasn't he directed any feature film until now? This was his first feature film as a director. You would have thought, coming out of, the 90s, when Fincher and other guys who were video directors were sort of becoming big directors, you would have thought that this guy would have gotten his shot way before 2010 and a Nightmare on Elm Street remake. But this was his first movie. I don't think most people knew that of his pedigree going in, so I don't think it really made much of a difference to most people. We get our sort of opening scene. The movie sort of starts off, I think, like most horror movies of the era, with a kind of creepy credit sequence where we get some flashes of little kids playing hopscotch and stuff. And then we get our sort of opening sequence, which takes place in the diner. We have the Twilight's Kellen Lutz as this tormented teen, and he's sort of wandering around in the kitchen looking, he clearly has gone into sort of a dream sequence, and there's like, hog heads and stuff. And we sort of get a glimpse of Rooney Mara as Nancy. Freddy shows up and he wakes up, and Katie Cassidy, who's playing, I believe her name is Chris, but she's clearly modeled after the Tina character in the original. She was also in the show Arrow. She shows up, and they have this sort of conversation.
He's initially just like asking for coffee, and no one will serve him. So he's like being ignored, and you don't know at first that he's dreaming. But then when he goes back into the kitchen, and it seems like he's in a boiler room.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, all the gross, like, animal heads and stuff, not good. And then we see the glove swipe at him, and then we see him wake up, and his hand is cut. And so, yeah, it's 100% clear that's what's going on. He was dreaming. And then he's talking with Chris, and she was also in some other remakes as well. She was in When a Stranger Calls, and I think the Black Christmas remake too, where you see Nancy, and she's talking to the guy from Jennifer's Body, and that's
Yes,
going
he's
on.
playing Quentin.
Kyle Gallner, I think his name is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so then that's all going on, and then Dean has passed out again, and then we get him with this steak knife, and yeah, I don't know. I thought like, okay, we're starting off good here. Like this is like I didn't see that coming.
Fred shows up and basically makes him stab himself in the neck with a steak knife.
Yeah, and I thought I thought we were starting off strong.
Overall, there's something weird about the scene. The way the movie starts, and maybe it's intentional that like they want to throw you off your foot right from the start because you're in a dream. But there's something about that whole opening scene where they're cramming every character in the movie into this one diner, and the guy who kills himself, Dean, he's doing that thing in horror movies where like he can't just put a sentence together to explain what's going on, right? He's just like he's a mess, and he's like, oh man, don't go to sleep, man. You can't sleep. I'm like, explain to her why, and she's like, oh, you're just imagining things, and like the hogs heads boiling in the pots and shit. This is going to be a recurring thing I'm going to talk about, which is that the dream sequences in this movie are so lame and unimaginative. And I will give credit that when he stabs himself in the neck, that was awesome. It looks really good.
Yeah.
I also want to point out, did you guys catch that? I don't know if you went back, because I went back and watched the trailer. This is clearly not the original opening they shot. Because in the trailer...
Not only am I aware of that, but I saw an advanced screening of this movie.
Oh, shit.
Yes, and it had a completely different opening sequence. That this whole diner sequence was a reshoot. The original scene that I saw in an advanced screening, it took place at a party. They were just at a house party.
That's what you see in the trailer. And so this diner scene feels like a reshoot.
It totally is. 100%.
That explains it.
Yeah. So, and I agree with what you're saying. It seems like they're like, well, we got to get all the characters set up in the scene. And I think one of the drawbacks of this film in terms of just its narrative is that it really sort of accelerates everything, so that you can tell they're just like, okay, we got to get the kids set up. You got to know who the kids are. And, they're all having these dreams, and we got to know about the dreams. And, like by the second scene, we're at a funeral, and now Chris is having another sort of dream where she sees her little self in front of the coffin, and Fred's glove comes out and slashes her. So, we're getting thrown right into it, and we're learning about the gang and their dreams, and we're meeting Connie Britton and Clancy Brown as the parents. So yeah, I feel like there's definitely a sort of sweatiness to the setup of the film where they're like, okay, we just got to get this thing going. Like, let's go.
This movie has no chill. That's what it comes down to. It's constantly trying to insist how cool and scary it is in every moment, and therefore it never has any dread. Again, the shooting of the diner scene, like I like the lighting of it. I thought that was cool.
I think it looks good.
Visually, it looks good, which I would expect from a music video director.
Absolutely.
Right. It's got a slickness to it that is sort of in line with the Platinum Dunes remakes in general, but I think my primary disappointment in a lot of the dream sequences is really that they're just kind of rehashing what happened in the original film. And in some cases, they're doing it way worse.
Yeah.
Like when Fred comes out of the wall, it's really underwhelming because it just looks like this CGI blob peeling off the wall, where in the original Freddy, you'll notice I'm differentiating between Fred and Freddy. And that's because Jennifer and I own a Fred Krueger action figure. His name is Fred Krueger, and it's Jackie Earle Haley in his like gardener uniform.
So you're the one who bought that?
Yes. We go to Nancy's house, and she's chilling with her iPod. She's doing like creepy drawings because she's a disturbed artist. And that's when we get Freddy coming through the wall, which looks terrible, I think.
It looks so bad.
And as I was saying, in the original, the effect is so cheap. It's just some, I don't know, tarp or something covered with paint, and somebody's pushing through the tarp. But it looks so much better than this CGI nonsense, which I'm sure was a lot more expensive. And just to put it out there, I'm not the practical effects are always better guy. I'm just not. I like both things. I love a great practical effect, and I love a well done CGI effect. So I'm up for them using state of the art computer imagery to accentuate Freddy and his powers, but this is just terrible, and it really sort of sets a bad taste in your mouth early on.
Right, but it's also like in the original, there's like a creepiness the way the wall slowly pushes in, right?
Yeah.
In this one, it's literally like a blob that goes "grah," like as though they're trying to make a jump scare out of it.
Yeah.
And it's the combination of the goofiness of the "grah" mixed with it's literally like the worst CG I've ever seen. It's like Langolier's level in this one moment.
Yeah, it's really bad.
Well, I think also it's not only is it doesn't look good, it's like it's such a forgettable moment, whereas in the original it's a memorable moment.
Yeah.
Like it happens like you said, it's like rah, it happens so fast that it's like if I would not have made a note of this, I would have forgotten it.
Yeah.
Like that's and I've seen this movie multiple times. And by now, why? I don't know. But I have. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's such a blip on the radar. It's like really quick with her. She's like sketching this like Fred blobs out and then cut to we're at Chris next. We're at Chris like talking about to her mom about the photos, like why doesn't she remember being in these photos because they had photos at the funeral and where are more photos? Like how do I not, she's having the whole issue that she didn't think she met Dean until high school.
Yeah.
So like how is she in these like kid photos and mom's being super cagey about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's just like that's how quickly it happens. Is this like blob with Nancy? Hey, Chris has questions.
Yeah, it sort of plays into Rodney's this movie has no chill.
There's so many like very forced and sudden jump scares,
Yeah.
and like to be like when I was watching it, I genuinely was trying to watch it as though I've never seen a Nightmare on Elm Street film before. I was trying to judge it as though it's just a movie called The Nightmare Killer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even under those criteria, it's so forced. It's just like there's so many moments of just like a sudden cut to Freddy Krueger jumping out of the shadows with the loudest stinger in the world, and then the scene moves on. Again, if you just let me talk for an hour, I would just talk about how you shouldn't be allowed to make a horror movie unless you love horror movies. And if I'm sure you've done your research, but apparently Michael Bay offered this movie to Samuel Bayer twice and he turned it down twice.
Oh.
And he basically had to convince him what a financial windfall it would be for him.
Right.
And I got to tell you, if you're a director and someone offers you Sebastian, imagine someone said you can direct the next Freddy Krueger movie. Would you say no?
I would pop a million boners.
That's what I'm saying. This guy said no thank you twice. So
Yeah.
this guy doesn't deserve to be directing a Freddy Krueger movie, and that's what you end up getting is a movie that comes from someone who doesn't get what makes Freddy Krueger cool and what makes movies scary.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with that, but I do sometimes think we put too much of a premium on filmmakers being fans of things. Like, oh, if they're not a fan, they shouldn't do it. I don't really care if somebody's a fan of the movie or of the property or not. If they can make a good movie, they can make a good movie. I would be more concerned about the fact that Samuel Bayer never made a movie in general.
Sure, let's add that on the pile.
Right, like that's I would be more as from a producing standpoint, that would give me pause more. But one thing I think he did a pretty okay job with is the cast. I think the cast is mostly pretty good.
I like the cast. I like all of the kids. I'm like I said, I recognized a couple from other horror movies. And then of course the adults, like they've got some heavy hitters. I mean, Connie Britton's a great actor, and so is Clancy Brown. I mean, those are the two most recognizable to me. And of course, Jackie Earle Haley.
I did miss the drunken mom from the original.
Nancy's drunken mom.
Yeah.
I know. This mom, Connie Britton, had it way more together. She was way more on top of things.
She should have been into pills or something, They should have gotten her into Oxy just to modernize it.
Yeah. Missed opportunity.
I think weirdly Rooney Mara kind of comes off the worst, which is too bad because she's our Nancy. I feel like the other quote unquote teens do pretty well. I like Kyle Gallner. I actually like the actress who plays Chris. I think she does a pretty good job.
Hmm.
But Rooney seems a little lost. She seems like she doesn't know what she's supposed to be doing. Her character is kind of supposed to be the dark one, I guess, because she does dark drawings, but she works at the diner and she's kind of got, a little sass to her. So it's kind of hard to get a bead on her. I think she's done some pretty good work over the years, but I feel like she seems a little lost here.
I see where you're coming from. I could the whole time I couldn't decide how I felt about Rooney Mara. For me, I think overall she works because I believe she's in high school. Like she's got a kind of a young face,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really know her as a character, but I get that she's tired and sad, and then she draws sad pictures, right?
Yeah.
For me, the problem for me it is Chris, and it's not because of her performance. It's because she looks like she's 45 years old, and I did not believe for 1 second she's in high school. Like literally, when she's like talking to her mom, I thought they were like friends, like at
Uh-huh.
wine book club or something. I expected a scene for her to go pick up kids, and I couldn't understand why you would like she's clearly like 29 to 32 years old when she made this movie. And I was like, why can't they just get actual like 18-year-old people to play 18-year-old people? Having said that, if you can look past that, yeah, she's okay. I don't think anyone in this movie is doing what I would call a good job, but
Yeah.
everyone's doing an okay job. If I had to give an acting award out, I'd give it to Quentin. I liked
Uh-huh.
his performance the best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's fair, but I also think that when you look back at pretty much any horror franchise cast, there are very few where you say, these are all award-worthy performances. A lot of times the actors acquit themselves well, but it's not like I felt that this was all on par. They were all doing what they were asked to do and doing it well. But the big question is Jackie Earle Haley. Okay.
Oh
So
boy.
we were all pretty excited about Jackie as Freddy, or Fred, as it were. I remember seeing, production stills of his makeup, and I was like, well, okay, I see what they're doing. They're going for like a legit burn victim look here rather than the stylized look of Robert Englund. And let's just get it out of the way. Robert Englund is iconic as Freddy Krueger. There's there's no way that anybody's ever going to play this character and not be compared unfavorably to Robert Englund. It's his role. But I appreciated, well, they're going sort of a different direction here. They're trying to make it look a little more realistic. And, I did like his little tick where he rubs his knives together. I thought that was the one kind of cool thing he did. But I have to say, overall, I was kind of let down. One of my big problems is, and this is not his fault, but he's a short man. And you can tell he's a short man in a lot of the scenes. You're like, are we watching Leprechaun? Are we doing Leprechaun here? I mean, he's just not a big guy, and it's kind of hard to make this little dude be super scary. I think he has the attitude. He hasn't, I mean, I wouldn't say he has the Freddy attitude, but he has an attitude. He has a very scary voice and a scary presence. But overall, I just found his stature and his look to be a little off-putting.
I had high hopes because I am such a fan. It's just really, it just doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
I
You don't
don't
have to
know.
apologize.
I mean, but I really wanted it to, and it's like even this time around, I was like, I don't know. It's just, and I think it's just because Robert Englund is so iconic. That's who Freddy is to me, and I know this is Fred Krueger because that's what we're referring to him as in the remake. And I appreciate them trying to do something different, and it's not his acting or anything like that. It's just I don't know. It's this the character looks it just looks he looks strange. It's not scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's not even like it's hard to look at or off-putting or anything like that. It just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't work for me.
I'm totally with you, Jen. It's just wrong. And I am again trying to let go of the fact that he can't be Robert Englund, right? Like you can't live up to that. So I kind of expected him to do something really different with the role. And I'm with you, Sebastian. The cool thing he does is when he like rubs his fingers together and they make that blade sound. I was like, yeah, that's cool. But that's it. I think the look of him, he looks stupid. Like it's like he's got these weird like kind of buck teeth that make him look kind of dorky, right?
Mhm.
And I know they're going for like a burn look, but like he doesn't look disgusting. He looks kind of gross, but he's not scary looking. And on top of that, what they do with his voice is like he never sounds like he's in the scene. All
No.
of his dialogue has clearly been recorded in ADR,
Yes.
and it's just like it's like floating digitally on top of the scene.
Yes.
So I know that that's a choice to like make it cool and creepy, but the whole time I was sitting there, I was like, why does this not work? Like, why is this not cool? And I was like, I don't know. He's just not cool. He's like slow moving. His lines aren't very good. His delivery isn't really good. Bad job. Like bad job. I like, what can I say? Maybe you shouldn't hire famous actors. I'd rather just have nobodies playing my monsters.
I remember reading a little bit about the production, and I think that the reason why his lines are so heavily ADR'd is because they rewrote a lot of his dialogue. They were unhappy with whatever the initial stuff was, and so they just kind of kept redoing it in post. And I feel like you can kind of hear a little bit of annoyance in Jackie Earle Haley's voice, like, oh, I've got to know, what's this line? His lines are weird. Like they're trying to be funny, but they're not really funny because they're in this really tough position of trying to live up to Robert Englund's sort of famous one-lines and taunting. I think the only one I really liked is when he says, like, why are you screaming? I haven't even cut you yet. That one I'm like, yeah, that's pretty good, But most of them are kind of creepy in a bad way. They play up the child molester angle of the character that was only really hinted at, and wisely so, I believe, in the original. And so, his lines are sort of coming from this perverted place a lot of the time, and I really don't think that helps sell the lovability of Freddy.
That's kind of like I think doesn't sit well for myself, and sounds like you and probably Rodney as well. Is it's like because we just knew him, originally as a child murderer, and which is implied, we don't, there wasn't just killing, there was probably other things that were going on that were terrible as well. However, now it's all about the yuck stuff, and it's like that can't be funny. You can't have like one liners and like be like creepy like that, and it's like you just don't know what to do with that.
More yuck and less yuck, I think, is the problem.
You know what I think it is? Original Freddy Krueger, there's a certain gleefulness to the fact that he gets to kill people in dreams. Even in the first movie where he has very few lines, you can tell he enjoys what he's doing. But this version is more like a suffering burn victim who's like condemned to this hellish fate. And he's, he wants revenge, but it doesn't seem like he really loves being the Dream Master, if you will, or whatever. I know he's not, the Dream Master is actually that other girl, but whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not even touching all the child molester stuff, which I assume we're going to go into in more depth, because that's like a major change.
We'll save that for the last act because that's when it really comes into play. But I feel that it's in there, even in these, opening sequences. He's sort of leaning into this. I'm being creepy in a weird, sort of subtly sexual way.
Yeah.
I did kind of think, just because it's so weird, we moved into the second act. We have Chris. She's kind of freaking out. She's sort of learning about this past, this shared past that they all have in this preschool, and she really knew all her friends, but they don't remember each other. And there's this sort of dream sequence where she goes out and she hears her dog barking, which it was a really cute dog, but she goes out and the dog
Rufus,
Rufus, yes. but Rufus is dead. Fred has killed Rufus only in the dream, I think. I don't think Rufus is dead in real life unless Rufus was dreaming and he killed Rufus in Rufus's dream, in which case they should have definitely had a dog dream.
Yeah, I wanted to see the dog dream go into a nightmare. Like the dog running around the boiler room, chasing bones that keep running away from him.
I have a bone to pick with the boiler room, but let me get there in a second. I did kind of like it in an ironic way when she goes out to find Rufus and Rufus is dead and Fred's like, I was just petting him with his claws. I was like, for this movie, that was a pretty good line. But really, a lot of these things that happen in the second act build up are just sort of replays of what happened in the original.
One thing I think that was different was I don't think, and I've seen the first one a million times, I don't think, did Rod come to Nancy's house in the first one? Like, is the guy Jesse? I don't think so. I mean, I only remember Glenn coming to her bedroom window.
No, I don't think he does.
I don't think so either. So that was something that was a little different, as we get Jesse like stopping off at Nancy's, right? Like it covered in blood and all of that.
This dude only comes in through bedroom windows. He doesn't know what front doors are for.
Not at all. Just all about the windows.
And one thing I want to say about the Chris murder scene is in the original, it was done with the old revolving room trick. Mm-hmm. And you see her kind of climbing the walls because they've shot it with a stationary camera, but with a room that goes around. In this, it's very clearly, they probably have a set with no real ceiling and they've got her on wires and they're like throwing her around the room in wires and then digitally erasing the wires and the ceiling and stuff. And it's not bad looking. It looks fine. But when you compare it to the ingenuity of the original, it once again comes up short.
You're spot on. Like it, again, the original is so much, like it's so cool the way that original scene is shot. And this one, she's flying around and it's just not as powerful because it's not shot from the perspective of the guy on the floor. Her death is cool when she gets like split down the middle and blood wells up. Like it's a violent scene. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But can we just briefly talk about how much time we spend with Chris as like the main character? Like, we're on Chris for, I didn't time it, but it felt like 30 minutes before we actually, like, I know we meet Rooney Mara, but it basically, it tries to do the psycho thing where it's like, this blonde girl's the main character, but gotcha. And I'm like, but I know Rooney's the main character. His name's Nancy. Why are we wasting all this time?
Yeah. Well, I guess they're trying to fake out the younger crowd who is not familiar with the original.
Totally fair.
But as somebody who is a fan of the series, it does sort of feel like they're being weirdly too slavish to the original, at least in that first half of the second act. Now, as the second act goes on, we get things that are sort of new additions to the story. The whole preschool backstory is not in the original. They have a vague sort of implication of stuff like that in the original, but they really lean into it here. I don't mind that. I think it's, I'm just glad that they're doing something kind of different, at least at that point.
I will say that out of all the things they could have named the preschool, they call it the Bad Ham School.
Badham.
And I was like, yeah, I know it says Badham, but that's Bad Ham.
Yeah.
Which is a really weird name. Could have named it anything. But the one thing I will give this movie some credit for, I mean, there's a couple others, but the fact that they all knew each other when they were kids and they all went to the same school and interacted with Fred Krueger when he was alive, it makes more sense why the parents would be dismissive of their nightmares, right? Because they'd say they would think you're having traumatic nightmares of that guy that molested you. That makes sense to me. As opposed to in the other in the original, where it's like, that's funny, my daughter's dreaming of that man I murdered that she never met, right?
Yeah.
So I do like the idea of like Rooney or Chris, whoever you want to say, discovers it, that like finding out that they're all connected and finding the photograph. And I do give credit for that because it does create like a breadcrumb trail for her to follow.
Yeah.
I didn't mind it at all.
I actually also wanted to bring up, there was something that I had forgotten about that I saw on this watch. which takes us to the bad ham school, was that, Nancy's in the tub and, you see Freddy's glove come up and I was like, here we go. We're just going to do what we did with that before. And they did a little differently, which I appreciated that. And also they brought some technology into it because she had a cell phone alarm to wake her up now, which that wasn't available in
Cell phones, which
1984.
felt really outdated now. They're already
Yeah,
super
well,
outdated.
2010.
Man, when I
Yeah.
see outdated cell phones in movies, I just have to laugh. Those cell phones are so old. Anyway.
Yeah, but yeah, I appreciated the addition of the school and that whole thing because I really did like that from the original as well, which they didn't go in as deep, but
Yeah.
just that it's a creepy, just a creepy concept.
So then after that whole scene, like Quentin basically, she wakes up in the tub and Quentin calls and tells her Jesse is dead. Then we get this prerequisite scene in every horror movie where Quentin is researching. He's running low on his pharmaceutical speed, but he's researching on Gigablast. All about dreams and stuff at the coffee shop library. He and Nancy Gigablast the Badham preschool. And how is
Bad ham.
Bad? I mean, I'm like, maybe it's a reference to John Badham, the director of Saturday Night Fever and the 1979 Dracula, but that's probably a stretch. And, I believe this is when they set up the idea of micro naps where you can just be sort of fall asleep just for a few seconds. I have a feeling we might have an argument about this, so I'm excited.
Yeah, I feel it brewing. I feel the opposite of whatever you feel.
I kind of like the micronaps idea. What do you think about that, Rodney? Do you like micronaps?
Fuck micronaps, bro. I think this is the dumbest fucking thing in the entire movie. And from this point forward, it becomes such a laughingstock of a film because of the introduction of this concept. I literally hate it. It basically is an excuse to have nonstop jump scares from this point forward.
Yeah.
Why do you like them?
Well, first of all, it ups the stakes a little bit because, we're not just waiting for them to get tired and fall asleep. Now things can kind of happen at any moment. And at one point they're back at the high school, I think, and that's when we get Nancy seeing the Chris character in the body bag, which is another visual reference to something that happens in the original one. Again, not done as well. I totally agree with you, and you definitely are right that now they've got license to throw jump scares at you at a dizzying pace. So I'll give you that is an obnoxious byproduct of the micronaps, but I do think that there's some fun to be had with them. But it allows things to happen, like, one character to walk down a hallway and see, scary vision and whatever. And it also allows for Quentin to have a micro nap as he's at his swim meet. I really appreciated how pasty poor Kyle Gallner or whatever it was. He's really pasty, and you can tell that he's probably doesn't swim, and he's looking really uncomfortable in his little Speedo suit. But he has a micro nap, and he wakes up in a pool in a warehouse district. He just wakes up in this pool, and it's outside. I mean, I guess it's a dream, so whatever. But then we're sort of treated to the origin, quote unquote, of Fred, where the parents are chasing him into this warehouse room, and they throw Molotov cocktails in the room and burn him alive. And as he's burning alive, he rips off his jacket to expose the striped sweater, which I felt was was a real forced reveal of the sweater.
I'm like, bro, I've been watching your movie for an hour. I already know what his sweater looks like. This is not a reveal. Obviously, that's the bad guy. Wait, I need to park on this moment real quick because I know you want to talk about the origin, but that swim meet is the worst scene I've seen in almost any horror movie. And it's the scene I reference whenever I talk about this to anyone. The guy falls asleep while swimming. He's in the middle of a swim meet and he falls asleep. Someone wrote that and they like put it in a movie. It makes no sense, guys. Come on.
It's
Admit
a micro
that. That makes
nap.
no sense.
It's a micro nap, Rodney. It's
in
a micro
between
nap.
strokes, he just nodded off for a second in the middle of
That's what
swimming.
happens. That's how powerful they are.
You know what? I'm going to stay awake for 3 days straight just to see. I want to see if I can fall asleep while I'm making a sandwich and then just wake up with the sandwich in my mouth. That's actually way more believable than swimming. But all right, I've said my piece about this.
But you guys, we forgot to talk about, this was right before we get into the how Fred was burned with the Molotov cocktails or whatever. We did have that flashback, and I think we have to take a moment for this, where we get to see Fred Krueger as a gardener.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's not burned.
No.
He looks very, very nice, and
Nice
he's
guy.
got like a kind of a strange Southern accent. And he's living in the basement of the preschool.
Yes. Nothing weird about that. I mean,
Nothing creepy there.
He was just the gardener, and he lived in the basement of the preschool. And boy, he loved you kids.
He loved you. Kids were his life. And we see him just so happy with all the kids.
You have a job, get an apartment. Why are you living in the basement of the school? And how come everyone is okay with this?
Right. Like why were any parents okay with sending their kids to a school where the weirdo gardener lives in the basement? And it's okay. And he it's okay that they go down there and do like art projects with him or whatever.
Yeah. Honey, did you fill out that application for the Bad Ham School? You know they have their own on-premises gardener / caretaker / kid watcher, babysitter.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems like Fred got caught doing some stuff, so they burn him alive. There's a really sort of bad moment where he runs out of the burning building and he's on fire. But here's my real problem with all of this is throughout this movie, both before and after this scene, we get boiler room imagery. There's no friggin' boiler room in any of this origin. Like, he's not in a boiler room. Is he supposed to be in a boiler room when they burn him alive? I mean, in the original movie, they burn him alive in a boiler room. And that's why the boiler room is sort of his primary dream hunting ground. Like, that's why he's always drawing people into the boiler room, is because that's where he died. This isn't a boiler room. It's like some sort of like relay room. There's like, it's not a boiler room. And this always really bugged me about the movie. Like, why does he bring these teenagers into his dream boiler room? He didn't die in one.
Because when he was alive, he always wanted a boiler room. He was like, one day I'm going to move out of this preschool basement and into the boiler room of my dreams.
Into a sweet boiler room. And your parents denied me that. So I'm going to kill you all.
You're totally right. It makes no sense in this movie because the answer to your question, anytime you have a question, it's because that's what happened in the original.
Right.
So I'll just do it again. But I come back to the point that the director doesn't actually like the movie. So he doesn't care about answering these things with any detail.
Yeah. It really, even when I first saw the movie, and I think I was a lot more forgiving of the movie than probably either of you. And upon my first view, well, no, actually, no, my first viewing, I was not forgiving of it because I saw a test screening and it was pretty much resoundingly terrible and we all gave it terrible marks. But then I saw it again when it came out, however many months later, and I was like, well, okay, they kind of improved it. Like, this is better. Good. I'm glad you took my notes.
If I've learned anything from your podcast, it's that instead of just watching good movies, if I just watch the bad ones over and over, I'll start to like them.
Yeah, I call it force feeding, Rodney.
Yeah, I've seen The Wolfman 42 times now. It's pretty good.
It is hard in this movie, I'll give you that. We then we move on to Nancy watching a video blog because those were pretty hip back then in 2010. We get the Asian actor from the Friday the 13th remake. I don't remember his name, so I'm sorry.
Isn't it? Well, I don't know what his name I wrote down his name was Martin Yon. I think that was his character name,
His
though. I don't think
character name.
that's his. Yeah, I don't know what his real name is off the top of my head. Anyway,
He's in the Friday the 13th remake as one of
yeah,
the main characters, and he's pretty good in that.
Yeah.
no,
he,
he's good. He's like kind of kind of a stoner in that, right?
yes.
Yeah, I think he's the dude. He gets the screwdriver, and
Here he just talks into the screen, and then he's talking about how he can't sleep and how he's being tormented by Freddy, and then he like smashes his head against the screen. So it's basically a snuff blog because I think we're to assume he's dead after that, and then we sort of get this. Quentin comes back from his dream and he confronts Clancy Brown, who's his father. Who is he? A guidance counselor? He's a teacher at the school, but they never make it clear.
I thought there was a line about him being the guidance counselor.
That's what I thought too. That was the only thing I could grasp onto. For all I know, he was the principal. I have no idea. He and Nancy confront Dad about killing Fred. He says they might have made it up. This is also a frustrating moment in the movie because at that point I'm like, oh, that's a good twist. Like it just didn't even happen. Like he was falsely accused. Like I feel like if they had gone in that direction, and I'm sure there is a draft of the script where they did go in that direction and then they chickened out, but I feel like that was a potentially a good twist that Fred could have been innocent.
Even though I've seen this before, I had forgotten that until when it popped up this time, and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, they're doing a whole like the McMartin trial, type thing." What was that? The preschool where the owners were accused of something,
Yeah.
like they were doing the satanic panic stuff or whatever,
Yeah.
which was all bullshit. So I was like, oh, they're gonna do this now because that was the Quentin and Nancy were saying to Clancy Brown, we were just kids, we could have said anything. Why didn't you go to the police? And I thought, okay, yeah, this makes it even better that he wasn't a creep, like he was unjustly murdered by the mob.
Well, and it gives Fred a real reason to come after them, which I never really
Yeah.
felt that he had even in the original film. He's like, why is it never really made total sense to me why Fred is after the kids. And I felt like
Well,
this
because he's like, you guys totally stopped my murder spree, and I'm pissed, so I'm gonna kill your kids. He like,
I guess that's as good of a reason as any to come back from the dead.
That's enough. Sometimes that's all you need.
Well, I just think it would have been a nice layer to, you might have actually sympathized with Fred at that point that, well, he's coming back for vengeance because they really screwed him over. But they back out of that in the climax, which is kind of lame. Okay, so now here's where we're going to resume our fight about the micronaps because Quentin has run out of his pharmaceutical speed, so they go to the pharmacy. And so that we get this whole sort of set piece that takes place in the pharmacy where Quentin's trying to get his drugs. The pharmacist isn't going to let him have his drugs. Nancy's having micronaps in the car, and she's got to burn herself with a car lighter to stay awake. And then she goes into the pharmacy, and I think this is the best scene in the movie. For one reason, because it's not doing anything that was done in the original and doing it poorly. But because I think it's really cool, despite the presence of the boiler room, I think it's really cool when she's sort of toggling in between as Fred's coming down the aisle and he's swiping in the dream and stuff's falling off the aisles shelves as he's swiping. I feel like they really use the micronap idea really effectively there to make a cool scene. It's something we haven't seen before in a Nightmare on Elm Street film. Rodney, tell me why I'm wrong.
Because the scene's not really that good. Because, like, I like that she's attacked at the drugstore. But first of all, she knows she's being hunted by this, like, vicious dream killer. But she keeps refusing any kind of drugs that will keep her awake, which is really weird. And then on top of that, he's like, I'm going to go into the well-lit drugstore. Do you want to come with me? And she's like, no, I'll just sit in the quiet, dark car where I totally won't fall asleep. So it's already not making sense. But it also is when she gets attacked. Oh my God. How, like it's the way the editing is, right? It's that opposite of being subtle. It's like cutting back and forth between the reality and the dream. And yeah, it's cool that he swipes and like knocks some shit off the shelf. It's just like, I don't know. I think the movie is so mediocre up to this point that you're just happy that Freddy Krueger is slashing at her.
Are you saying me personally, or are you saying
yes, you Sebastian?
No, I honestly think there's some like clever filmmaking there. I think it's a clever conceit. I think it's got a level of ingenuity to it that I appreciate and am so desperately craving in this movie.
Well, it actually, and I think I said to you when we were watching this, I was like, "Oh, this is like the one thing that I remember from watching this before is because I remember the scene. I remember with the cigarette lighter in the car and everything, and I do also. I have to tell you, Rodney, I was frustrated as hell the entire time with her not partaking in some sort of drugs of some sort because
Yeah, thank you.
come on. Like, yeah, no, that was frustrating for me as well because I'm just like, I don't know what your deal is as to why you won't do this, and trust me, I get it. I come from a place of that as well, but we're dealing with Fred and micro naps.
Well, and at least Nancy in the original, she's like popping like no sleep or whatever, like
Yeah.
no dose.
No dose or whatever
Well,
it is, yeah.
it's a knockoff
Right,
version
a
of no
knockoff,
dose. It's
yes,
a funny name,
yes.
but I forget what it's called, like no sleep or something.
Can't sleep
Yeah.
or something, yeah.
So yeah, she should at least be doing like 5-hour energy drinks like crazy or whatever. Isn't that what the kids like to do? Get all hopped up on
Yeah.
those?
I think they like snort Red Bull.
Yeah, she should have done that.
You forgot to mention an important thing, which is that they tell you if you don't sleep for like 70 hours, you'll go into a coma that lasts forever. And I think that's important later.
I totally forgot that. That's one of those things that has just glossed over me, even though I've seen this movie more times than any human being should be legally allowed to see it. But yeah, it does come back later, but I did not ever register that they set that up in there.
It's like when they're doing all their research.
Right, okay.
When they're using Gigablast.
I was just so hyped up on Gigablast and micronaps that it just went right over my head.
I kind of want to do like a comprehensive listing of fake search engines from movies and like what's the best? What's the champion? It might be Gigablast.
And then start it. Like do it as a startup and beat Google and become masters of the universe.
To be fair, I don't want to shit all over this drugstore scene. I'm gonna go back after this and just rewatch that part because like maybe I'm being a little harsh on it. You both seem pretty excited, and there are parts in the movie that are cool, and maybe this is one of them. So I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt here, even though I watched it last night and can't remember it.
I appreciate that you're giving this movie any props at all because I expected this to be a bloodbath. Now we're down to our final two, Quentin and Nancy. She gets cut and they go to the hospital. And did you recognize the nurse from the hospital? Did either of you recognize who this is?
I had that moment of like, she looks familiar, but no idea.
She is the actress who played the original April O'Neil in the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Yeah, she was the original April.
How exciting!
I wasn't a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles guy, but I did put that together.
They go back to give Nancy pain meds because the mom Connie Britton signs off on it.
Right, and let me ask you this: what is she sign? Is she like signing her over to like a mental institution or something, or is it just to give her pain meds?
It didn't seem like that because like they kind of do like a long shot on the document that she's signing, and I was looking at it and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, if that's what they were implying is like we're going to let you commit her or something,
right.
But
it said, I hereby swear that I did not burn a man alive for molesting my daughter 20 years ago. No, it says at the top something like permission to administer medical care.
Yeah.
So I assume it's basically like, I hereby give permission for you to like forcibly inject my daughter with sleeping meds.
Right. Why do we need to have a shot of the document there? They put emphasis on the document, which was strange because if that's all it is, then who cares? We don't need to see this document. But then we get the moment where former April O'Neil goes to inject her and she lifts up her hand and no, she's got the Freddy claw, which
Micro nap.
yeah, we'll see. Good use of micronap there. You don't get that without a micronap. No sirree, Bob.
Yeah, Quentin like grabs some adrenaline out of a drawer. And like, dude, I watched this movie like 24 hours ago and I don't remember what happens. They run in the car and he's like,
No, that doesn't even show them running out. That just shows them in the car. Like
Right.
they come back to the room, Nancy's gone, cut to they're in the car, and
Right.
Quentin's busting out the adrenaline to shoot it up.
Right.
Like we don't even know how they get out.
Yeah,
They
it's
just
one
do.
of those like, don't worry about it. We just need to get to the next scene. They get away. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so he Quentin juices up in the leg, and of course, I mean, you guys picked up right. His name is Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah, with the
Pulp
adrenaline
Fiction.
shot.
I don't understand the reference. Did you?
There's a director named Quentin Tarantino who directed
Okay.
some pretty famous films over the last 25 years or so, and
Oh,
one
that
of
sounds
them
exciting.
featured very prominently an adrenaline shot sequence. You should check it out. It's called Pulp Fiction. It's pretty good.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I'll put it on the list. Thank you.
Yeah. So Quentin shoots up in his leg. They have their sort of tender moment where they're driving to the abandoned preschool, and Quentin asks her out on a real date. And I liked this line. She sort of puts him off and he says, well, why don't you sleep on it? And I was like, all right, clever writing there. But then Fred shows up because they micronap, I guess, for a second, and then they drive off the road. They've got to walk the rest of the way to the school.
How did Quentin micronap after he just shot himself up with adrenaline? Like,
Yeah.
that was my one thing was I was like, I mean, maybe he's just that tired. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to nitpick things, but I really, that was my honest thought was like, didn't he just take this adrenaline?
Yeah.
I'm going to nitpick too, because the same thing happens when she burns herself with a lighter. Like, your arm would hurt so bad that the whole point of doing it is so you can stay awake for like maybe 20 more minutes. So why go through all this? Like they get adrenaline and he injects in his leg if it doesn't have a purpose.
Fair enough. I think they're just trying to sort of set things up and then do reversals and then set things up. You know, I get it. It's definitely doesn't make total sense, but I also see they're trying to keep you engaged like with things. So, but yeah, it doesn't really make sense. What also doesn't make sense is that this creepy fucking school is not been turned into like luxury condos or something. It's still there with the paint peeling off the wall and like creepy kid artwork all over the wall.
Yeah.
You know, look, it's a horror movie. We need to have our climax take place in someplace creepy. You know, they set it up that this preschool was the place of, you know, where all these terrible things happened, but it's sort of ridiculously art directed in that way that would never happen in real life. And then they find Fred's molesting cave. Like they find his bedroom first, which still has his bed in it.
Here's the thing that I don't understand, right? Because they make a big point about how they never went to the cops and they just like assumed he was molesting their kids. So the implication is that this place was closed down because, you know, of what Fred Krueger did. But from the perspective of reality, Fred Krueger just disappeared one day and didn't come to work. And so didn't the maintenance crew go downstairs and they his knife glove is still sitting on the table, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's literally like they're like, how can we run this place without good old Fred Krueger doing the lawn? Close it down. Just close it down, Shelley. They locked the front door and left.
Right. One of two things would have happened. One, people would have found out about these horrible things and they would have torn the place down. Or two, no one would have found out about these things and they would have just kept the place running and turned his bedroom into another classroom. Or, you know, it would still be a school. What doesn't make sense is that now it's the haunted house or whatever. It's not the Michael Myers house. You know what I mean? It's like, it shouldn't, it doesn't make sense. Cause you're right. They don't go to the cops. So nobody should know that this was a horrible place.
But I would just assume that they didn't pay their county taxes on time. And so the county just kicked them all out and chained it up.
So yeah, they find his bedroom, which still has his gross bed in it, which will actually come into play later. And then they find his creepy molesting cave, which is sort of another room in there, you know, and just to put it out there, you know, we're making light of a lot of this, but we are not making light of, you know, child abuse in any way. This is what makes the movie I think ultimately no fun. I mean, and I can deal with this in a horror movie context if we're talking about something that's, really hard and serious or whatever, but we're trying to have fun here. The thing about Freddy Krueger is that there's a fun element to him, and when you introduce this into it, like, the fun is gone. Now he's just a disgusting creep, and I'm not on his side in any way, the way that you are with your favorite horror franchise characters, where you secretly are on Jason's side, and you're secretly, at this point, you're just not on his side. And I think this is truly the tragic flaw of this film.
I 100% had that same feeling, and this is also you're possibly on his side because only of what was mentioned earlier or alluded to, that this was like the kids had lied about it, right?
Yeah.
So then, like, at that point, you're like, fuck them up, Freddy. Like, these kids lied. Like, you were wrongly murdered by this mob. And then now here's the pictures, yuck, that are, he did do it. Like, he's after them. Like, the line Quentin says is like, he's not after us because we lied, he's after us because we told the truth. And that just, yeah, it's just that whatever you were hanging on to, that this film was going somewhere, like, you just really feel like the wind just go right out of the sails. So it's like,
and to make it even worse, Fred wants them to remember his abuse of them. Like, that's specifically cited as his motivation, that he wants them to remember. So it's sort of gross layer upon gross layer.
It's so much gross and just so, like, just bad. It's like there's nowhere to go from here.
A tiny detail earlier in that, when you see the flashback of them as kids, there's like a shot of young Chris, the blonde girl, and you see that like her back has been like clawed and she's got scars on her back.
Mm-hmm.
So this notion that like maybe they made it up is fucking nonsense, because like she clearly came home with her back carved up and her dress torn up. So like it's like the movie's not even sure if it's trying to pull that joke on you or not. But Sebastian, you're totally right. I'm with Jason. I want to watch Jason murder a bunch of people, right? But like, it's hard to root for the dude that like raped a bunch of little kids. Like, that's messed up.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of messed up content. Like, give me the messed up stuff. But like, this movie just feels like it's going a little too far. And the fact that he keeps like bringing it up, it's just like, it makes it feel so icky that you can no longer have fun. You're totally right.
They have like a moment in one of the flashbacks where they show Jackie Earle Haley holding up a gardener claw. like that's where he got the idea to make the claw. And I don't know, or maybe he was clawing them with that, not the knife hand. But then they find the knife hand, which is also not really set up in this movie. In the original movie, that's the weapon he used. And he put those in the furnace of the boiler room that he was burned in, and they find, like, I think the mom still has them in the boiler room, their boiler at home or whatever. So they really set up the knife hands. Whereas in this, did he really have that knife hand glove in real life? Or is that just part of his dream persona and it was the gardening tool in real life? It's not made clear.
No, because when they go down into the basement, Quentin and Nancy, on the table, there's like one of the knife fingers, as though he was like in the midst of assembling it. Like it was his life. Like he was like, pretty soon my knife glove will be ready. If it weren't for those meddling adults.
Yeah, right. So maybe he never got to finish his knife glove project. And
I think that's what it is.
Okay. Well, that tracks.
I think even in the original, or I think it's the original though, don't we actually see him making his glove?
It's the opening sequence.
Yeah, that's like, it's a whole thing. Yeah, that's what I remember, with like the fire and he's like putting his glove together.
Yes.
So I see exactly. I mean, like, there's so much care and detail going into like the glove history.
Yeah.
In the original, that it's just to be so like brushed over now and just. Yeah, it falls short. To also mention, when we're talking about the yuck, going into, once these Polaroids are found and that whole thing happens, like the yuck gets dialed up so high. Like all the yuck lines just start coming.
Yeah, I emphasize that it's hard to offend me, and this scene really offended me. Like, there's like multiple moments where I was like, "That's gross." Like that, take that out.
Well, and to make matters worse, we go into the basic setup of the climax, which is similar to the original, where Nancy has figured out earlier in the pharmacy, she pulled out a little piece of Fred's sweater. So she knows that she can bring some corporeal element of him out into reality. So she's going to go into sleep. Quentin's going to watch her. She's going to grab Fred and pull him out. So she goes to his gross molester bed, goes to sleep. Quentin grabs a paper cutter blade off of an old paper cutter that's lying around to do some Fred killing. But of course, stupid Quentin falls asleep. So we go into this big final dream sequence where both Nancy and Quentin are both sleeping. So they're sort of both dealing with the dream world. Quentin ends up in the boiler room that Fred never was burned alive in. And he throws him around and he slashes him pretty bad in the chest. But then Nancy calls out, and because Fred has kept telling her, "You've always been my favorite," so he's really got a mad boner for her. So he goes chasing after her, and we get sort of a replay in some ways of the climax of the original film. At one point, she's in the original, Nancy's running up the stairs and her feet sink into the stairs, and this time she's running down a hallway, and then she falls into like the rug, and it's all bloody water or whatever.
I like this part because he has one of the better lines here, and he goes, "How's that for a wet dream?"
Right.
And I was like, okay.
That's one of the only lines that sound like an OG Robert Englund line. That's something he would definitely have said. But so she falls into the water and falls through the floor and into her own bed at home. And now she's wearing the little girl dress that she used to wear. And this is where for me, this is where it gets really gross.
No.
I like the part where she falls through the ceiling too. It's a little CG, but this whole sequence with the bloody hallway, while it's brief, I will give credit where credit is due. I was like, that part was well done.
I like the sequence with the hallway. I like when she falls into her bed. I also appreciated that Quentin fashioned a weapon out of one of those giant paper cutters, because those things have always, anytime in an office or whatever, I'm like, this thing is crazy. I'm just glad to see somebody using it as a weapon, because it is. And then totally like the Glenn before him, the homage comes back again where, that all happens. But I was here for all that. It was fine. It was Nancy in the baby dress where I just was like, I just can't. I can't. And this is one more like I actually took notes of the things, because I was like, these are all so gross. Like, your mouth says no, but your body says yes. And I just wrote barf, because it was just like, it's just so yuck. It's so yuck. And then when she first runs into Freddy, she says, "Fuck you" to him. And he says, "That's a little fast for me. Why don't we just hang first?" And it's just like,
and then he shows her bodies hanging in the boiler room. That's just terrible.
And I like puns, but this is just it's not okay. None of this is okay.
And he's running one of his knife fingers like up her skirt, and it's really, I won't say shocking, but it's surprising that this was a creative decision that they decided to go with, because to Rodney's point of the director or whoever not really understanding what people like about this series, this is not what people like about the Nightmare on Elm Street series. This is not what they want to see Freddy doing.
I think they really are just trying to be like, yo, we're going to earn that R rating so hard, people are going to love it. It just has aged really poorly. Also from why I brought up the coma thing is because the implication that he basically says here, right, is like, I basically have kept you awake for all this time, specifically so you would fall into a permanent coma, and I could just like have you for eternity in your dream state.
Yeah.
Which is like really creepy. But also I have a question I have to ask that's a little icky, but like, if Fred Krueger is into kids, why is he into 18-year-old Rooney Mara?
Right.
Like, that doesn't really even make sense within the logic of the film.
Yep.
And that sort of occurred to me too. Although I did like, I did, that was when he says that about having her trapped there forever. That at least was a moment in the movie where I kind of got a little bit of a like, ugh, you know, I mean, just because the idea, I get sort of things like that where concepts where people are going to be trapped, like, fine, murder me, stab me with a fucking machete, cut off my head. It's all good. That's going to be like 2 seconds and we're over. But the idea of, keeping me in your dream world for forever and, tormenting me is that actually gives me kind of a bit of a chill. But yeah, it doesn't, you're right. It doesn't really track with the whole child molester idea that he'd be just as jazzed to do it to her now. I mean, they could have had her regress to a younger age in the dream. Like, why does she have to be that age in the dream? But I'm sure that was a bridge too far that they weren't even willing to go for.
Even hearing you describe it is making me uncomfortable.
Yes, right. Like, well, there's
maybe you should have directed this movie.
No, there's just nowhere to go with that idea, unfortunately. You know what I mean? I think it was a bad idea. They shouldn't have gone there at all.
Like, I feel like if they thought that they were going to be edgy or try to, like, it's 2010 and we're just going to really, earn the R rating, like you said, or, just try to have like a shock value, it just came off just like, this is just really poor taste. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work with what this film is.
There's a little part of me that applauds them for trying to be gross.
Yeah.
They just fail at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
I think that what they misunderstand and what a lot of people misunderstand about the slasher genre, especially when you're dealing with sort of supernatural characters or supernatural adjacent characters like Freddy, Jason, and Michael, is that it's more a fantasy thing. And when you become a fan of these movies, you end up becoming a fan of the characters, even though they're reprehensible and horrible murderers. It's sort of similar to the way you feel about superheroes or, other fantasy characters. You don't want them too tethered to the terrible, horrible things that really happen in real life. It's fine for them to stab people and hack them apart. That's the depraved part of us that is satisfied, but we don't want to see really horrible atrocities occur at the hands of these characters. They are in some weird way fantasy figures to us, and we don't want to see that.
Well said. You summed that up very well.
Basically, Nancy stabs Fred in the eye with something, but he can't die in this world. We do get the line, I'm your boyfriend now, which, of course is a callback to the original. Quentin tries to wake her up. She won't wake up. So we get this scene where he shoots her in the heart with the adrenaline, calling back to Pulp Fiction. This wakes her up, and she drags Fred into reality. They fight in reality, which is, pretty satisfying at that point. She cuts off his hand with the paper cutter blade and then slashes his throat. And she says, "You're in my world now, bitch," which decent line. I feel like that might have been said in one of the other movies, but I'm not sure. One of the other Nightmare movies, but I'm not sure. Yeah. And that's basically it. They burn the creepy school and
again.
Yeah. Like, learn from your fucking past. Also, why? Like, they now have proof of like the burned dream killer that they pulled into reality.
Right.
Why don't they like take pictures, call the cops, be like, look, we found Fred Krueger, right? Like, it would help explain anything that they might need to explain, right? In case they're going to be accused of murder. But they're like, nah, let's just burn it all.
Well, not only, so his body is still there, right? After they kill him.
Yeah. She slashes his neck open. He like bleeds to death. And he's just a dead body on the floor.
Right. So, like, for the sequel, they should have not burned down the building. They should have called the police. They should have explained to him, look, this is a guy that's been dead for I don't know how many years.
like 15 years.
Right. I guess there'd be no way to prove that because they never, I guess, found his body to begin with.
They could do like carbon dating, I guess.
But then you could do a whole sequel where like now we're dealing with a reality where you can like pull people out of dreams. Like, what does that mean? Then you've got your dream warriors and all that. So yeah, missed opportunity there. But so yeah, that's basically it until we get our stinger scene where Nancy and Mom return home and there's a mirror and Freddy's in the in the mirror and he throws his claws out of the mirror and they go right through the back of Mom's head and out the front of her face, and her eyeballs are on the tips of his knife fingers, and it's really dumb.
It's literally just like the movie ends with a sign that says "fuck you, go home." Like, it's so out of, like, to be fair, I think most Nightmare on Elm Street films end with like this ridiculous stinger that's sort of like non-canon.
Yes.
You know,
the first movie has a terrible one. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's no worse than that, if we're being brutally honest.
The first one, isn't that the one where she gets like sucked through the door? Or no, that's when she gets in the car.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, right.
No, the mom does.
Right. She gets in the car. The car like is a convertible that closes up.
That has
She's trapped in there.
It's got Freddy's sweater painted on it, basically, on the convertible roof.
And then Mom gets sucked through the, what do you call it? Like the peephole?
No, it's like the it's that glass, like it's got a fancy name. I don't know. The glass above the door that's like super small, so it's like it's not for a person to be pulled through.
Yeah, she suddenly becomes like an inflatable sex doll, and is yanked through the tiny window in the door. So it's not like they had a lot to live up to here, because that's pretty terrible. But this is terrible too. And then we get Dream by the Everly Brothers or whatever over the end credits. Yes. And that's basically the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. So let's move on to closing thoughts. Let's start with positives. I'm going to say that I think this movie looks decent. It's decently, the production values are good. We forgot to mention the scene where Chris is in the classroom and she has her dream. It's mirroring a scene from the original, which is done more gritty and better. But, there's suddenly she's in this, dilapidated post-apocalyptic classroom. And that's when we first get a good look at Fred at the chalkboard. There are some moments of nice computer-generated imagery that sort of hint at the potential of what a movie like this could be. Just in terms of production design and production values, I think it's fine. Although I do agree that none of the dream sequences are as good as they could be.
I think the actors overall were good. I think the film looks good. There's, it doesn't look like it was, poorly made. I don't mind the callbacks to the original. I mean, they're beat for beat there at some spots, but it's fine. It's a remake. I'm not upset about it, but that's just what they're doing. Those are the positives. There's the scenes that stood out, like the pharmacy scene. I do like the scene that you just mentioned as well with when she's learning about Sparta and in the classroom and we get to see Fred for the first time and his fingers on the chalkboard and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I'll go into what I didn't like, but there definitely are things that I like about it.
I think it's a case of liking by default, right? There's nothing in this movie that I will want to show to somebody and say, you've got to see this scene or this moment or this shot, because there's nothing in the movie that rises to excellence.
Right.
However, there are things that are not bad or need to be shit upon. Like, it is shot very professionally. This is clearly they had a budget, they had a good DP, the director has a pretty good eye. I would say half of the movie, there's some good stylish shit. Like some of the boiler room sequences, the way the framing is done. I thought the part where she's in the bloody body bag looked great. Some of the kills, while too fast, are very gory and violent, and I applaud that because that's sort of the reason you come to these movies, right? And again, there were a couple one-liners that I liked, and having Clancy Brown in your movie is a plus for me every time. He literally can't be in he can be in a bad movie, but he's never bad. So I think on my second viewing this time, it was a lot less offensive than I remembered it being. I can say that, you know? But again, I don't think there's anything about this movie except maybe the part where the dude cuts his throat at the beginning that I thought was truly badass.
What do you think went wrong here creatively? I feel like I've sort of, my main gripes with it creatively are the decision to back out of the idea that Fred is after them out of revenge because they lied, and then to go full child molester. Like, you never go full child molester.
I was thinking about it while I was watching the movie, and I kept thinking, I was trying to put my finger on why is this movie bad? And part of it falls under the category of like just it's so bland, it's forgettable, right? But I now know what the problem is. And the problem is in all the other Nightmare on Elm Street films, the dream sequences are these set pieces to themselves. They're like little short films, right? That you
Yeah.
look forward to.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you realize that person's dreaming, some dread comes, Freddy gets him, turns into a fucking worm, or he like turns into a TV set, you know, like or he turns the one dude into a puppet with like, you know, the veins and shit. And that's why you come to the movie. But this version does away with that because of the micro naps. It says we're not doing dream sequences. We're just here to have like a scary guy with knives jump out of shadows. And so you are actually undoing the very thing that everybody wants, right? Like that's all you actually want out of a Freddy Krueger movie. I don't care about his backstory. I don't even care about him killing people with the glove. I'd rather he doesn't kill anyone with the glove. And in this movie, it's the only way he kills anyone. And I think that's the biggest sin the movie makes is that it takes the premise of a man who gets you in your dreams and basically just turns him into a dude who stabs you with his hand in your dreams. Like that's lame, guys. It's lame.
Well, and it is arguable, I think, inarguably the greatest horror movie killer premise of all time, that a guy kills you in your dreams because you can't not sleep. So I don't think there's ever been a better initial premise of a slasher movie. And I agree. I will maybe back down from the defense of the micronaps just because you make a good point there. I think if they had done new dream sequences and done the micronaps, I think there could have been something at least to make this stand out and be a little more memorable.
Yeah, and again, I acknowledge what you're saying that they put the micro naps in to try to up the ante and make it be like, oh, he can come anytime. I get that. I just think it's a missed opportunity, you know?
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna have a whole sequence in a swimming pool where the kid falls asleep, let's make it a big sequence, you know? Like a
Right.
really badass, but instead it's over like that. All the dream sequences start and then the person wakes up or they get killed. I understand that you want to recreate the first movie, but like you're totally right. There is no better idea for a slasher film. Like sooner or later, you're gonna fall asleep, and this guy's gonna get you. And going all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, when I said that all of the Freddy movies are like up and down, and some of them are really bad and some are really good. They all have really great death sequences. That's the thing. Even the worst of the movies have these nightmare scenes that you're like, oh, that's twisted, you know?
Yeah.
And this movie's just like, I don't care about that part. I care more about telling you the backstory of how maybe this guy was a pedophile, but wink wink he was. So big shocker. Like whether he was a pedophile or not, he's still murdering people from the beginning of this movie. So he's clearly the bad guy. So why are we making a mystery movie out of it, you know?
If they announce, which I imagine one day they will, that they are going to try this again, I'm sure it won't be with Jackie Earle Haley or anything like that, or Platinum Dunes, if they even exist anymore. Would you be interested in seeing it, Jennifer?
Absolutely. You always, gotta hope for the expect the worst and hope for the best. That's how I roll. So yeah, I would totally go see a reboot of this again in the theater. Absolutely. Give it a shot.
Now, just when they announced this movie, apparently he did screen tests with Kevin Bacon as Freddy Krueger before
Mm,
Jackie Earle Haley, which I actually think could work in a weird way. At least Kevin Bacon has the sort of build, and he's lanky, and you could do cool stuff with his makeup and his face. I also remember people bandying around the name of Ben Foster from
Hmm.
6 Feet Under,
Hmm.
and he's actually
Yeah.
in 30 Days of Night and stuff. I think he could have been. He could be a good. He's got a good creepy vibe. I think he could be a good Freddy Krueger. Rodney, would you be up for another attempt at this, or are you just gonna dig in your heels and say, "Don't ever try to do this again"?
No, as a like, look, I'm a horror fan. I go see everything, right? Like, honestly, I have no idea why these large franchises don't just make a new one every year. Like, if I ran the studio, every fucking Halloween, maybe every 18 months, you would have a new Nightmare on Elm Street film and a new Friday the 13th. And like Saw did it for like 8 years in a row, right? And
Yeah.
like, dude, it's not that hard. Like, I promise I'll come to your mediocre dream killer movie every fucking Halloween. Why does it take so long?
Yeah.
I'd like it to be a little better, but yeah, I will go to the next 10 remakes of this film
I
franchise.
was just going to say, it is utterly baffling that they can't get these things. I mean, I think a lot in the case of the Friday the 13th series, it's because there's some sort of rights issues like going on.
That's fair.
I mean, that one's a no brain. I put a guy in a hockey mask. I mean, what is the
Dude,
big deal? You know, like,
if the three of us were arguing over the money, I'd be like, "Look, guys, can we just agree every year that we argue we're not making any? So how about we just split it 3 ways and
right.
we make one every year. Let's just churn them out." They act like everyone doesn't like Freddy Krueger because they had a bad critical response to this movie.
Right.
And it's like, no, we didn't like your movie. Try again. Do it again, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can start over. Be like Spider-Man. Just keep starting over until you get it right again.
Right.
However, I disagree with I've read some articles about Kevin Bacon being interested in the role. And I gotta tell you, I think the misconception is that everyone thinks of Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, but he became famous because of the role.
Right.
He wasn't a famous actor. And I think the minute you put a famous actor in the role of Freddy Krueger, the audience can't stop looking at him as the actor. I kept
Yeah.
seeing Jackie Earle Haley. Just find me someone I don't know and make that the new Freddy Krueger and fill the rest of the cast with famous people.
I think there's a sort of middle ground where you could get a character actor, somebody like Ben Foster, who most people don't really know who he is. I mean, Robert Englund was a character actor. He had been in other movies. It's not like he was
Sure,
an
sure.
unknown. I mean, he's in, A Galaxy of Terror and all sorts of stuff before he became Freddy Krueger. So, I mean, I think, will anybody ever live up to Robert Englund? Probably not.
That's the problem. They're such big boots to fill, you
Yeah.
know? Um, and it's impossible to play that role without inviting everyone to compare you to Robert Englund.
But I mean, I think with the right person, it can be done where you can have, both versions, both actors, living in a world where you can just enjoy both of them. Like I feel that way about having Bill Skarsgård play Pennywise. It's like I first knew Pennywise as Tim Curry through the miniseries,
Yeah.
and that's just how I pictured him. And then here comes Bill Skarsgård, and I'm like, I love him. And I think he also, at least at that time, was probably towing that line of not being, super well known, but had done some notable things. And so he was able to slide into that and do his own take on it. And I'm now, I like both versions. So I think it can be done.
I think that comparison is pretty good, but I also feel that, there was only one attempt at it before they made another one. So
Yeah,
even though people were kind of hung up on Tim Curry's version, it wasn't like Nightmare on Elm Street where we got, 6 or 7 whatever
sure.
movies with one guy. I think it's, the more movies you make with one person, the harder it is for people to shake that. I think people of our generation will never get over Robert Englund. I don't think there will ever be a version that will be able to compete with him, but I think it's such a strong idea that the temptation to not reintroduce this character to a new generation is, it's way too much. They're going to try it again because it's just such a good idea. And, I know those movies still exist and young people can go and find them and watch them, but like, come on, let's be real. They don't want to do that. So there's money to be made in that Freddy sweater. That's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll back down on this. They easily could find a more well-known actor who still just does a different version.
Yeah.
I think you got to just get away from the Freddy Krueger I'm so used to. Like, I remember thinking Heath Ledger was the worst idea ever to play the Joker.
I did too. I was like, what? Really?
Yep. And then we all saw the movie and we all went, I apologize. I'm really sorry. You're amazing. So I genuinely think someone out, maybe it is Kevin Bacon, maybe it is Ben Foster. I guess we'll find out one day, because they're gonna make another one. There's no way they just leave this where they left it.
Well, let's hope they do a better job. But anyway, thank you guys for being on this episode, and I want to wish you both the sweetest of dreams. That about does it today for Tentpole Trauma. If you like what you heard, check out our social media presence on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just look for Tentpole Trauma. That was easy, wasn't it? If you like us, hit subscribe and leave us a sterling review on iTunes, if you dare. If you really like us, head over to patreon.com and get involved in one of our fabulous tiers. You'll be glad you did. Want to communicate with Tentpole Trauma? Send an email to tentpoletrauma@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And who knows, one day you may even get your email read on one of our shows. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you real soon.